woman's right to choose will be challenged today by the tens of thousands who will gather on the National Mall to voice their opposition to any form of abortion. Vice President J.D. Vance will be the headliner at the annual march, though President Donald Trump will reportedly deliver a remote address to the crowd. Trump's views on the issue are more complicated than people sometimes realise. In his first term, he named the justices who helped undo Roe v. Wade. But he has also favoured leaving the issue to the states from here on out, rather than backing a national abortion ban.
On Thursday, Trump pardoned around 23 pro-lifers who were thrown in prison over the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act.
Some of the crimes these protesters committed included forming blockades in front of abortion clinics. In one case out of Michigan, for instance, prosecutors argued that protesters conspired to prevent people from getting reproductive health services.
Here's Senator Josh Hawley on the floor this week discussing one of the imprisoned protesters.
Here's what she was doing when she was arrested. She was singing hymns in a clinic hallway from a wheelchair. That's right. She was arrested for singing hymns in a clinic hallway from a wheelchair. This concentration camp survivor, 89 years old, immigrant to this country, was put in prison, federal prison, by the last administration because she sang hymns from a wheelchair. Mr. President, I cannot begin to express, words do not capture the injustice of what this administration has done.
Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts wrote on X, "For 30 years, the FACE Act has been weaponized against people of faith who peacefully take a stand in defense of the unborn. It is an egregious violation of our rights and American values. My friend Chip Roy is spot on. It's past time to repeal the unjust FACE Act." Meanwhile, some on the right are now blasting John Fetterman for opposing the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act. The bill requires doctors and medical professionals to provide the same degree of care for a child born alive during an abortion as any other child.
Violators of the bill can face up to 5 years in prison and fines. Democrats say this bill is redundant since infanticide is already illegal. Fetterman wrote on X, "I've always stood on the side of Roe and a woman's right to make her own healthcare choices. It's absurd to mandate criminalisation because of those choices. Any bill that does so, including the Born Alive Survivors Protection Act, is a no from me."
Conservative podcaster and commentator Michael Knowles wrote, "John Fetterman comes out swinging for denying medical care to infants screaming out for help on an operating table. Here's your centrist, reasonable Democrat, folks."
So I personally find the pardons issue more interesting than the Fetterman issue, because that just seems like basically it's making illegal something that is already illegal, as I understand it.
Not exactly. No, so basically how it works now, they claim that it's just double banning infanticide, but it's not exactly quite the same. So right now, when survivors of abortion are born alive, the doctors basically do not have a requirement to provide any medically necessary care to keep the baby alive. And there's been horrific stories about babies basically been put in closets to wait until they die so that the nurses don't have to hear the screams. There's an abortion survivor by the name of Melissa Oden, whose life was saved by a nurse who basically heard her crying after being born alive from an abortion and saved her life, and she miraculously survived without any complications. So what the law does is it requires doctors to, rather than be negligent in the care of these children who are born alive post-abortion, is it requires them to exercise the same degree of care that they would have if the baby were born under any other circumstance.
But wouldn't you be obligated to provide that care anyway, is my question?
Not after an abortion, because the intent of the abortion is to kill the child.
But if that fails, then the child is still alive. So
right.
You can't. So I don't understand how you can deny care to it.
That's the law as it stands right now,
okay.
And that's what doctors don't have an obligation to provide care to the baby born alive because they've already tried to kill it, essentially.
Okay. I mean, that seems peculiar to me if that is truly the situation. But in any event, so the pardons that Trump has issued, I think we will obviously disagree on, and I think that these people were convicted of crimes that are clearly crimes under the statute. In some cases, there are two crimes. There is the FACE Act violation, and there is the conspiracy against rights. Now, these people are obviously, by the very nature of it, adamantly opposed to abortion and trying to prevent people from having abortions. And so the FACE Act says that it is a crime to, quote, by force or threat of force or by physical obstruction, to intimidate or interfere with anyone seeking or providing reproductive health services. Now, Josh Hawley, with all due respect to him, is being disingenuous in saying that people are being arrested for singing hymns. People are being arrested for blockading access to abortion clinics. I understand their moral argument. They believe that abortion's murder and they're preventing murder, but the law very obviously prevents people from doing that in a way that stops other people exercising their right as it then existed to an abortion. And I just want to mention one point, Amber, because I'm sure you'll have specific counters, but in one of these cases which pertain to Michigan, and I'm not sure if that's the one that Hawley's talking about, where there's a woman in a wheelchair singing hymns, but prosecutors talked about the effects that that had on people seeking abortions, one of whom was a woman identified only by her initials of SS, who had booked an appointment at this abortion clinic in 2020. She came with her husband. They had learnt that the fetus or embryo she was carrying had fatal abnormalities, and that continuing with the pregnancy, to carry the pregnancy to term, would have caused grave danger to her health and to her future fertility. And SS and her husband could not get in for this appointment that they had booked, which they had a legal right to. Now, I just think about someone in that degree of distress, having already to deal with that degree of trauma, trying to get around people who are physically blocking her from a right that she enjoys under the law. And I think that if we acknowledged her rights in the situation, we'd be a lot better off.
Well, I agree that people should not be blocking access to the clinics. That is against the law. They're not allowed to obstruct people's path or getting in the door to the clinic. But I've watched a lot of the videos of these individuals who were prosecuted and ultimately convicted and sentenced to multiple years, by the way. And a lot of them were not blocking access to the clinics. But because the FACE Act specifically says attempts to intimidate people who are going in, a dishonest prosecutor or DOJ can read that as, if you're praying near the entrance, that could be seen as an attempt to intimidate someone who's going in to get an abortion.
Well, in the most high-profile name that I see mentioned in the reporting of these pardons, it's a woman by the name of Lauren Handy, and she and several others carried out a blockade of a clinic here in Washington, D.C., where she encouraged fellow protesters she had booked an appointment under a false name, for a start, because I assume she's on some kind of watch list as a very fervent anti-abortion activist. She then came in with fellow protesters, and they joined themselves together with locks and chains to block the doors of the clinic. This is in 2020, when obviously, it was legal to get, well, still is legal to get abortions in the District of Columbia. The point is, if you are chaining yourself together to block access to an abortion clinic, you are plainly infringing the FACE Act. It doesn't require any cynical or dishonest prosecutor.
No, in that case, you're actually 100% correct. That is blocking the access. I already said you're not supposed to do that. That's against the law. But the problem I have is that there are multiple videos that I've watched of people literally singing in the hallway, as Senator Hawley suggested. I watched them when they were first charged with these crimes, singing in the hallway, and they said, nope, you were intimidating people who were going to get abortions. And then on top of that, they added that other charge that you mentioned, which has increased their sentences basically tenfold. It's similar to what prosecutors did with January 6th by adding on that terrorism subcharge. Well, it's true.
Well,
and I would also close with the fact that the FACE Act is also supposed to protect people who are seeking religious services, right? It's supposed to go both ways, but yet under the Biden administration, they prosecuted these 22 pro-lifers, and yet there were hundreds of individuals who blocked access to Catholic masses and other church services in the aftermath of Roe v. Wade being overturned, and not a single one of those people faced prosecution under the FACE Act.
Well, if we get into the January the 6th parallels, Amber, we will literally be here all day. I have discussed it with our friend Mr. Suave several times this time. We're not going to come to a joint agreement on it. But in any event, good discussion. Up next, the salute that is reverberating around the globe.